as in D&D, where talking to your players and being honest about when this is an encounter where you need to pull out all the stops and get creative as opposed to just hitting stuff, that communication is what it's all about. And Delicious in Dungeon, this would not be as fun and as interesting to me if I didn't already know all these things about all of the tropes. It is absolutely banking on those tropes. And, I love it.
Dragon claw, wing and scale. Come now, let's examine a tale of the greatest beast ever considered. Another episode of Big Flying Lizards.
Welcome to Big Flying Lizards, a dragon movie and television podcast. I am your host, Bryce Wilson, and I am joined by a very special guest today. I am joined by arguably the person who, and I'll explain more of this later, but sent me down this trajectory of all these D&D miniatures you see in front of me. You can blame him. You can blame this man in front of me. Virtually.
It's my fault.
It's all Colby's fault. But
it's all my fault.
Colby Ford. Colby Ford is a professional game master and storyteller with a deep passion for crafting an immersed, character-driven tabletop RPG experiences. His journey into TTRPGs began with a notoriously complex Rolemaster system, a trial by fire that ignited his love for world building and cinematic gameplay. Over the years, he's mastered dozens of systems and designed a custom 1- and 2-player campaigns, has introduced countless newcomers to the magic of tabletop RPGs, and has made me cry several times in character and out of character. Colby has a science education in his background where he has done geological data collection, lab analysis, and research, tools that enhance his ability to build intricate and beloved worlds. So let us say hi to Colby. How are we doing, Colby?
Doing good. Doing very good. Happy to be here.
I'm really excited to have you on. For those of you that are listening, Colby was my dungeon master when I was going to Dixie State, now Utah Tech, in St. George, Utah. He has seen me at my best. He has seen me at my darkest, where I should be institutionalized. I like to joke around and say that we started doing session 0 campaigns because of how messed up I got one character to go. So, I don't know if that's something I should be proud of or just something that just happened organically. Who knows?
Yeah, I'll blame you for my obsession in-depth session 0s and safety tools, and it's all Bryce's fault. You heard it here.
I pretty much had Ramsay Bolton as a Dragonborn as a character, and I'm not exaggerating when I say it was...
Well, and I run horror games, particularly right now. If you follow my links, you'll find me running horror games that go into some really dark places. Bryce was too much. That should tell you. I joke, though.
I don't. Well, I am really excited to cover today's episode. Well, today is actually going to be another series of episodes. For those of you that don't know, TV shows are my passion. I love a good TV show, and particularly anime. I love anime. This might be a little bit, I touched a little bit of this last week, Colby, and I actually want your initial thoughts before we jump into just the show in general. There's been a lot of discussion on this podcast that, especially here in the West, creativity is sort of dying out. They're trying to either just do nostalgia bits, or there's not a lot of new things that people are trying to take risks and be creative. And I think that's why there's a lot of people you'll see oh my gosh, they're making movies woke, that's why they're bad. I'm like, no, they're just being lazy and not wanting to take any creative risks. And you can make the argument that in Japan, they're not making creative risks either, just because they're doing adaptations of manga. But at the same time, I feel like if you go pound for pound, what they're releasing out of Japan is significantly better percentage-wise than what the West is producing. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that, what you see with especially some of the stuff coming out of Studio Trigger and some of those that have, they've made it to Netflix for a reason. They're getting popular for a reason, because we're all just hungry for something that didn't come out of a freaking boardroom, that wasn't meant to go to the least common denominator,
Yeah.
And
And
that's it's I really do feel like American media has gone a little bit too cynical, and they're putting profits far, far before creativity.
And I think that's also just reflective. And I mean, again, like I mentioned it in your intro, but with your background in education, specifically at the university level, I mean, you see firsthand how just society is not prioritizing the arts. They're not prioritize, like, obviously arts are upheld to an extent and a university
Mm-hmm.
standard, and even scientific is held up to, but once it gets to the real world, they're like, okay, how is this going to make me money? And if they don't see it right away, they're like, all right, well, have fun. Go try to sell your art at an art show over here, or try to go to
Yep.
a farmer's market and sell stuff. I think we actually had a conversation about this during the pandemic, that we really were thinking that there was going to be like an art renaissance out of the pandemic because everybody was forced inside. And I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on this. But my takeaway is, like, technically there was, but it's not in the way that we were necessarily talking about. Like, yes, there's been a resurgence of art. There's been people going out and making their own creative things and doing it. Unfortunately, the corporate mindset is not taking in, and they're just saying, well, that's cute. We're going to keep just cranking out our old thing. And it's not necessarily being financially supported. Because I mean, I look around, I see on Patreon, I see on all these different paid subscription apps, just beautiful art that's being produced, beautiful stories that are being made, but it's just not translating to.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really not. You have to go deep before you find people who are really putting themselves out there. And otherwise, it's hard to live in this country, in this world, in this economy as it is with a normal ass job. And if you're trying to, sell some kind of art, then you're going to struggle. I mean, I'm essentially full-time running RPGs, and I consider it an art form. And it's an art form that can have an audience of like 5 at a time. So the economics of that are tough. They're really tough.
Yeah, I definitely think. Well, don't worry, guys. We'll get to more positive topics. We're just. You also have to understand, like, Colby and I went from like talking like all the time and texting about characters and how he was going to ruin my life with a character that was slowly dying of lung cancer or something, like, to us just. I mean, it's a tale as old as time. Just D&D groups splitting apart. But
I know.
so if we do go on tangents, we might be having a 5-hour episode. I'm not trying to,
I've
but
got water. I'm good to go.
but Colby, if it's all right with you, I'd love to introduce what we're talking about this week.
Absolutely.
All righty. So we are going to be discussing Delicious in Dungeon, or Dungeon Meshi. So, Delicious in Dungeon is an anime television series based off the manga series of the same name by Roku Kuya. Originally announced in 2022, the series was produced by Trigger. It is directed by Yoshihiro Miyagi. The story follows a group of adventurers in a fantasy world who, after failing to defeat a dragon that consumed one of their own, embark on a journey through a dungeon to revive her, surviving by cooking and eating monsters that they encounter along the way. The series aired its first season in 2 consecutive cures from January 4th to June 13th, 2024 on Tokyo MX and other networks, with Netflix licensing it for streaming and subdomaining worldwide weekly. After the final episode of the first season, the second season was immediately announced. So right off the bat, I love this show for so many reasons. It's a show I particularly love how this show could really be for anyone.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's a little, probably has a little bit more violence and gore for maybe like kids below the age of, I don't even know, like I'm at that awkward age where I'm like, is it appropriate for kids? I don't know. I say fuck around here and I'm like, that's the kids.
Uh-huh.
So, but at the same time, like, I could see myself at like 10 watching this, and like it's
Uh-huh.
not that big of a deal. The fan service is not out of
Mm-hmm.
control. It's a genuinely wholesome show for at least these first 6 episodes.
Yeah.
And I also want your thoughts on this, Colby. I feel like this show reflects what a Dungeons and Dragons campaign or just a role-playing campaign is like better than
Mm-hmm.
any other piece of media that I've seen. I know people will point at
Mm-hmm.
Critical Roles of Legend of Vox Machina, but that, like, and again, spoiler alert, Colby's going to be coming back for that show later down the line. But just you wait, because we'll be right back with more information on that. But again, like,
You said you wouldn't tell.
there's a lot I said I wouldn't tell. No, but I seriously feel like this show represents what it's like to be in a tabletop RPG game better than any other show. And it's just because there is that level of just goofiness, that level of like trying to explain your character in a way that's not like, hi, my name is John. I'm a warrior from the north. Like,
Huh?
so there's like, because there
Yeah.
still is an awkward level to it, but it's not as awkward as it could be.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like I will bet anything that the creators, the writers play the hell out of D&D. I will bet anything that they have spent a lot of time rolling dice, playing various, MMOs, but this really does feel more D&D than even like World of Warcraft or anything computerized. It feels like they have sat there and thought about, okay, there's this thing, the dungeon, that is so huge to this whole hobby. Let's take it seriously for a second. And let's think about, how could it actually exist in the world? Let's think about it as an ecosystem. And it blew my mind. I was like, you can't take that thought that far. You're not supposed to think about these things that hard. Like, how does this pit trap like reset after everyone, even though the dungeon's 1,000 years old and all the ropes should have gone away by now? You're not supposed to think about that. And they went ahead and they did it.
Yeah.
And they just followed that idea wherever it went. I love that.
No, and I also feel like it does a great job at like covering the whole survival mode as a skill in D&D, because, and I mean, just I feel like, again, we're all guilty of it. If you're a dungeon master, you understand, like, you don't want to, like, okay guys, you're gonna go look out for berries, because if you don't find anything, you're gonna die. Like you can do that. And I've been part of campaigns, like, I feel like we maybe have done that like twice, but it made sense because our characters were just out in the middle of nowhere, we had not been around, and it just like, okay, logically you have to do that. But it's not like, you've gone 3 days, you need to find food, because I mean, like, let's be real. Like, I know I just said it, but it's just not the fun part. People want to go hack and slash, or they want to emotionally abuse each other as players.
Yeah, exactly that. And, that's an echo of an older style of game. That's the like Gygaxian, like 70s and 80s version of D&D, where it was a survival horror game. And you can play games other than, name brand D&D that still do that. But it's very much become more of a superhero thing. And I appreciate this show for taking those survival elements seriously as well, and considering these people as full biological beings, not just superheroes who are there for the story.
Yeah. And I'll also just echoing a little bit on the superhero side. I appreciate, it was it Laos, the main,
Huh?
like, I mean, you again know this from firsthand. I suck at rolling characters. I am absolutely terrible at rolling characters, and my characters
How long did you play a character that was literally Morty from Rick and Morty? I mean, literally named Morty?
too long.
Do the accent. Do the accent,
Oh,
Bryce.
jeez, Colby, I don't know. I don't know if I can. Jeez.
You all have no idea how many hours I've spent hearing Bryce do that voice.
Oh, jeez. Oh no, I'm just a weak monk. Again, we'll talk about it more once we talk about Legend of Vox Machina, but I feel like a lot of people imagine what Legend of Vox Machina, that's supposed to be what D&D is, where you
Mm-hmm.
have these badass characters and they have like a character flaw, but for the most part, they're badass in several different ways, and they're graphically inappropriate with their language. And again, like, I'm not saying that that's bad. What I just appreciate that Laios is a bad character. Like, he is not a good fighter. He's like, Ironically enough, the only thing he's good at is like knowing how to cook monster. And he's not even as like the dwarf is better at that than he is.
Huh? Yeah, he's got a quirk. I mean, and this is a really, really common thing for D&D characters that, that you can play for a long time but aren't all that deep. It's a character who has skills and is good at some stuff and has their place in the party, but also is primarily a quirk.
Yes.
And Laios takes it almost to the point of a fetish. Like, sometimes I'm like, do you only want to eat the monsters?
Especially in that first episode, I was just sitting like, you want a what? Humanoid? What? Misty Step. It's been a while. I've not seen you in the chat. It is great to see you. And yes, I love this anime as well. We are going to be talking about it in depth. Colby, do we have any other overall thoughts about the show before we dive into the specifics, or even just like how it ties to Dungeons and Dragons? Because I mean, obviously D&D is very important to the both of us. We both could make an argument that it's taken over a level of our lives and personalities in some ways. So I just want to give you the floor to be able to discuss on whatever aspect of that you would want on before we dive into the show.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the big thing that I'm going to just say over and over and over is that it's a term that gets overused, but this show is meta as hell. It's a show about a D&D campaign, which is like poking fun at other D&D campaigns, and it's really rich because it's got that level of like, if you've been in this world for a while, there's a lot of stuff that's going to jump out at you.
Yes.
And yeah, so that's what I'll keep coming back to, is just how many times this show made me think, no, you can't do that. I never thought about that way. All right, okay.
I'm not going to lie, there's been a couple times where I'm like, that's not a rule you actually follow in D&D. That's a suggestion.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well, and before we also dive in, I just want to get your thoughts on this. I don't know if you saw, but the directors and creators of the Deadpool and Wolverine movie are going to be actually working on a Netflix Dungeons and Dragons TV show, like a live action adaptation TV show.
I didn't.
I have mixed thoughts on that, just because, and again, like, we can do a whole conversation on this. I feel like the superhero market is a little just completely saturated, so I'm not as convinced that it could be as good as it could be, but I also think that that's the right direction to take. If you're going to make a D&D show, you want to have something that's going to be mega violent and just have like almost like borderline bad humor in it, because let's be real, like, as we all do find ourselves funny. Every D&D group, like, we do find each other funny, but we're all just bad comedians trying to be funny for our friends. And again, I love it. I try to be funny all the time in our D&D groups, and I know that I will make my friends laugh, and that's about it.
I mean, indie in the media is a topic I could hijack the entire show. So
Colby,
I won't.
You the floor
for your sake.
5 minutes. You got 5 minutes. I got to stop.
All right. I mean, like we talked about how much media is made by the boardroom these days. And not with a desire to honor something or to do a good job. It's just about like, can we cram as much stuff as possible? Can we throw in some of this nostalgia shit for the old people who liked to play D&D in the 70s and 80s, and some like superhero violence, because we think that's still good, and none of the boardrooms have realized yet that audiences are tired of it. I look at like the Dungeons and Dragons movie from a few years ago, Honor Among Thieves. It did very well. It was a very good movie. And I attribute a lot of that to the fact that the people behind it had a genuine love for this. And I see that same thing in Delicious in Dungeon. I see that same thing in a few properties out there. There are creators out there who want to do well, not for fans, not for ticket sales, but because they love the thing that they're trying to, and they're trying to honor it. It's like if you love buddy cop movies, you probably also really love Hot Fuzz. because it's making fun of buddy cop movies while also being one of the best buddy cop movies. Because the guy who made it loves buddy cop movies.
Yep.
You know?
Well, I again, like, sort of just to take that a little bit step further, I really should just cover this show, even though it doesn't have a dragon in it, because I love this show so much. But Arcane is made by people that love League of Legends and like very much involved. And you can see that this show is like clearly like I've only played League of Legends like 3 times and then realized I'm not toxic enough to play it. So
yeah. Ditto. But there's a fantastic world there.
Yes.
And they harnessed that. And it worked.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
I know. And I will always push this message because I want it so bad. I want it so bad, Colby. But the people that were really inspired, that made the show, were actually really inspired by Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archives. And I do not want Stormlight Archives to be live action. I want it to be done by the same studio. I want Riot Studio to come in because I'm sure it could be fine, but I don't think it would be done just if it's live action. Like it would have to take like Dune levels of computer generation to be good.
Yeah. And even like Sanderson himself has talked about like he doesn't see that happening. Brandon Sanderson and Henry Cavill were talking about, and Henry Cavill was like, "Can I play Kaladin?" And he was like, "Sorry, you're way too old and you're not Asian." But
and he's too yoked.
He's way too yoked.
You have to starve for a few years.
But I mean, I could see something like that doing really well. But then you look at the Wheel of Time. I won't say it's terrible. I'm not going to tell anybody not to like that or that it's bad, but you can tell that nobody involved really liked the source material, and they're just hitting the story beats because they have to.
And again, before this podcast completely derails, I feel like I need to go a step further. I think Amazon is one of the people that they're the most, what's the term? Like they're the culprits. They do this the most. Like if you look, like, again, if you see Rings of Power, people are like, well, it's bad because there's a black elf. That's clearly the reason that I'm like, no, it's because they literally like don't care about the actual story. Like it's visually incredible. And also the actors for the most part are pretty mid. Like nobody's heart is really in it, with the exception of Sauron, which, I mean, that's all I could ask for, is as long as the villain is hearted is, like, that's all that matters, right? But I think that's what it really comes down to, is when people are not actually, they're trying to make money off this show when you should be trying to make art with this show. But yeah, again, we can talk about,
they're trying to make it a money mill, and because they don't care, why should the audience care either?
They saw what Game of Thrones was able to do for the first 5 seasons, and they're like, all right, let's do that.
Do it again. Find another fantasy series that's really hot right now. Let's do it. Yeah. And I find myself, I see like new ads for that stuff, and I'm like, nah, sorry, I'm not gonna get my hopes up anymore, especially if I see live action. I think animation is likely where you can still see some really, really good stuff. And I mean, taking it back to Brandon Sanderson, I mean, I do not want to see Stormlight Archive live action. I do not want that. I want it animated. I want it anime.
I will say this. Dave Bautista in Shard play as Dalinar Kholin. Like, I might be willing to see that, but but that's literally the only actor. Like, that's the only actor where I'm like, yeah, that's who it is. And everyone else, I'm like, I literally can't think of anybody else that could.
Yeah.
But again, before this podcast, like every time, becomes a Stormlight Archives podcast, let's go ahead and dive into. Okay, so to give a little detail, just like we normally do with these TV show episodes, we're going to be dividing the show up into 3 chapters. Each chapter is going to contain 2 episodes. The first chapter is going to contain episodes 1 and 2. Second chapter is going to contain episodes 3 and 4. And the third chapter is going to contain episodes 5 and 6. Now, there's not a dragon that we get enough screen time for us to necessarily cover, so we're going to be saving a grade that we're doing for the end as a surprise. A delicious surprise. Chapter 1, establishing the party and learning to survive. Laios and his party encounter a red dragon in a dungeon, leading to Fallon being swallowed and teleporting the group to safety. 2 party members quit, leaving Laios, Marcel, and Chilchuck with no money or food. Laios suggests eating dungeon monsters, and they reluctantly try cooking a scorpion, which draws attention of Senshi, a dwarf skilled at monster cookery. Senshi joins the party after preparing a delicious scorpion and mushroom hot pot. The group moves deeper into the dungeon, and Senshi cooks a tart from a carnivorous plant of fruits. Episode 2, Senshi educates the group on poor diets of adventurers and suggests hunting basilisks for meat and eggs. During the hunt, Senshi demonstrates that eating a cooked basilisk can cure poison. Marcel struggles with harvesting mandrakes but earns Senshi's respect when her method yields a sweeter result. Senshi cooks mandrake and basilisk eggs omelet. Chilchuck and Senshi bond over traps and cooking, using fire traps to make mandrake and bat meat carnage. But yeah, Colby, this is not going to be a surprise to any of the listeners, but my pronunciation has not gotten better since college. I hope that none of my professors from Gonzaga ever watch any of this. They're like, we gave him a master's degree? He can barely read. But I feel like an episode, the first 2, I know there would be some people that argue, like, no, bro, you have to watch the first 5 episodes and then it gets good. I'm a firm believer that the first 2 episodes of a show really make a difference because, for example, I'm watching Evangelion and I understand that it's a beautiful show. I understand that it has an amazing story, but I really find the first like 5 episodes so boring. And it has everything that I love. It has giant mechs, it has giant monsters, it has fighting. But the first 5 episodes are just so boring, and I'm just like, who cares how amazing it gets on? But shows like this, shows like Arcane, shows like they get you in the first episode, and then like they just hit you again with episode 2, just showing you like, hey, like this is not only entertaining, but there's like a level of depth to it, and I feel like there's enough that people can actually connect with too.
Yeah, I mean, if you're running something like this, you've got logistics to lay out in that first episode, and you don't get to have a first episode that is like all the others. Like go back to older shows and watch the pilot episode of the X-Files, and it's not like all the other episodes of the X-Files for a reason. You gotta do character intros, you've gotta establish the why of all of it, and this show really, to a certain extent, it races through that to the point where I started rewatching these episodes, getting ready to come on here with you. And I was like, wait, they explain where the dungeon came from in the first 5 seconds?
Right?
What?
But it's one of those things.
It's so fast.
Oh, that's cool. That's paper.
Yeah. Blink and you miss it, and it explains everything, and it hints at some things that are going to come up later. I mean, they do a great job of giving you a little bit of backstory, just enough that like there's supposed to be a reason for all of this, and then they start introducing characters, and they do a great job of keeping that momentum going and keeping it focused on the why of what's going to happen for the next 12 episodes.
So there's a subject that I want to touch on a little bit and just get your opinion on. What would you grade on, what would you say each person's class is? I feel like they're all pretty obvious, but at the same time, I also feel like this is a podcast to discuss these subjects. Like, what would you say each of them are?
I mean, so here's the thing. Every game has its classes.
Yes.
Or at least like every game like D&D. D&D 5th edition right now has 12, 13, 14 classes depending on if you count the Artificer and the Blood Hunter and whatnot. But those classes stand in for fantasy archetypes, and the show isn't really caring about the words that we set on these things. But like if you're comparing to 5th edition D&D or to Pathfinder or something similar, then you've got your very clear big 3 characters. You've got your fighter, you've got your magic user, you've got your rogue. And the rogue is even a short little guy because that has been a halfling job forever.
Tolkien.
And even the classic 4 characters, the classic 4 classes that came with the very first edition was fighting man, you got your priest, you got your wizard, essentially magic user, something like that, and a rogue. And their cleric is the character that's going to be missing, very, very prominently missing, for the first half of the series. So they absolutely are playing with those archetypes. And, you know, you've got Laios with his classic, like, big fighter armor, and he's the tall guy, and he's like, he's blonde and dumb. I mean, he's the designated himbo, which is perfect fighter territory. And you've got Marcel, who just kind of like is nerd, has magic, is there to basically kind of go ick at things at first for a while. And you've got Chilchuk, who's there to like be pretty out of the way for the most part until he's needed,
fancy,
which is the rogue thing.
No, I think that's I couldn't agree more on that. I also feel like Senshi is like something that I love and appreciate is I feel like Senshi is the again, to use Pathfinder, to use 5th edition, is the barbarian. But they take a nice little twist that you never really see with barbarians, and I wish more people would have fun with this. They make him, I don't want to say intelligent, because he clearly has like a level of being dumb, but his wisdom is like, I'd say his second highest stat. Like strength is, I'd make the argument, you know what, wisdom is his highest stat. He's not particularly stronger than anybody else. He's great with a battle axe, but what is he especially great at? Making monsters into food, which is a survival check.
Yeah. I'd honestly even argue that you could build him as a ranger instead of anything like that. You hardly ever see him fight anything. He's all about surviving in this environment, and it just happens that this environment that he's all about surviving in is an artificial monster-filled dungeon as opposed to a nice forest where there's normal animals to eat. He's doing his thing. He's surviving. He's happy in his environment. He's happy with all the creatures around him. He respects them. He doesn't hate monsters. He doesn't find them disgusting.
No.
So, like...
You know what? You convinced me. I think he is a ranger who decided to take the feat of two-weapon fighter?
Yeah. Yeah, he's a ranger using heavy weapons in a way that 5th edition should let you do as a ranger, but it doesn't. So, like, that's Senshi to me.
Here, Wizards of the Coast, listen to us. You're going to change your rules for this podcast here.
No. Yeah, that's why they're going to do it.
Not for monetary reasons at all. No, I genuinely do love that. I really did not think about it that way. I was just thinking like, oh, barbarian, but he's not stupid. But I definitely like that. We've got our first controversy in the chat over here, Colby. Misty Step is saying here, Laios isn't dumb. It's just that all of his info is about monster biology.
Yep. Yep, exactly. That's all he knows. He knows it really well. And yeah, I wouldn't say he's dumb. He's clearly not an old guy. He acts like he's maybe 18, 20, somewhere around there. And he's got obsession level knowledge about monsters. Like, he's honestly, like, if there's an autistic character in this show, it's Laios, and that's his favorite thing.
I've been making an argument for years now that all main characters in anime, like, just think about it, like Deku. Think about, not Deku, Deku, Bakugo, in My Hero Academia, in Dragon Ball Z, Goku, Luffy in One Piece. They all are on the spectrum. Like, you can't convince me otherwise that these...
Yeah.
Like, if you met somebody who acted unironically like Luffy all the time, you're like, okay, like, he is living his best life, and I'm happy for him for that.
I mean, there's other shows completely dragon unrelated that do the same thing. I mean, Archer. Archer's on the spectrum. Like, it's very, very clear that he is on the spectrum. There's even IP out there that is not doing much with it, but I mean, this is another tangent, and this is completely unrelated, but one of my guilty pleasures is like airport paperback action novels,
Okay.
like the Gray Man novels. And one of, I don't know if you've seen like the Netflix movie with stares into the distance man won't eat his cereal. Anyway,
I can't say that I have.
he's a secret agent spy action hero kind of thing, but like if you read the novels, it comes out that like he is the way he is because he's on the spectrum. Because like find a fit person on the spectrum and they'll make the perfect secret agent. They'll make the perfect, and I think Laios is a great example of that. He is the big superhero of all this. He does some really badass stuff because he has found a place that he absolutely loves, is obsessed with, never wants to leave, and just goes to it even if everybody else thinks he is being a creep and a weirdo. And
Well, even in the like, I'm pretty sure they say in the first episode, like, you don't actually want to go buy food. Like, you just want to, like, you're excited that we're broke. You're excited that we have to go. And like, which bear with me, I remembered as something I did want to discuss, but I feel like this show does an awesome job at like justifying leveling up without making like, oh, you got 20, like because I've seen animes where they're like, oh yeah, they're leveling up and they're like straight up just saying leveling up and experience, and I'm just like, but I feel like that's very lazy.
mm-hmm.
Now, what they do is like each time they fight a monster, they're like with the mushroom creature, they're like, oh, if you try to hack at it across the
Mm-hmm.
body, it doesn't penetrate its skin. However, if you go down and across, it splits easily. And I feel like that's a great way of just like learning how to actually fight these things without being like, and Laios got 25 experience points during this episode.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that like I actually have been a critic of D&D 5th edition of not doing very well is giving monsters specific ways to solve them.
Yes.
A monster, to me, when it's really fun, a monster is the most fun to fight when it's actually a puzzle. And it's an action-based puzzle as opposed to like, can my dice produce the biggest numbers?
Yes.
Which is what it can devolve into. If you really, really know what you're doing, you can make any system do that, of course. But yeah, and I love that this show takes it there. It shows you what gaining experience and getting to be a better adventurer would really look like as a real person is, I know how to defeat this now. I'm not, I'm not bulkier now. I didn't like, it's not just because my stats went up. It's because now I know this creature and I know how to defeat it.
No,
I love that.
I personally agree with you so much on that. One issue, again, not to turn this into a Dungeons and Dragons podcast, but I actually, sorry, Austin, sorry, Kimmy, I almost did a TPK this a couple weeks ago because I've been struggling so hard because I feel like combat has just been too easy for my players. And it's like, okay, I either just get this huge, powerful monster to have them fight, or I just throw all these things that are super easy and it's just not fun.
Mm-hmm.
So what I decided to do is are you familiar with Skaven in like the Warhammer? Yeah. So I brought in Skaven, and individually they're sort of like goblins. Like they suck. Like they're not that powerful, but they all have pack tactics. So they all get advantage and they can attack twice. And I rolled 27 natural 20s during this episode.
Yeah. That's what happens when you have a combat where you roll a lot of times. Anytime you make that happen as a dungeon master, you are going to cause there to be a lot of high rolls, and they're all going to benefit you as the dungeon master, and you're going to be like, oh crap, I'm killing them.
Nana Vagar in the chat. Note to self: Bryce is a wrathful god as a DM. You have no idea. Not only am I a wrathful god, I take pleasure in the pain that I see caused. The emotional damage that I see as players, like when a player dies and I see the pain on everybody's face, I revel in that. Blood for the blood throne. No, but in all seriousness, like, but going back to what you're saying, the players decided like, oh, we need to attack the main Skaven and the monster Skaven, because they're the two most powerful. If we take those out, they'll be leaderless. But in reality, if they would have just taken out all of the little ones real quick and then focused on the big ones at the end, that's what they wouldn't have almost TPK'd over there.
Yeah, I mean, it's to me, that's one of the places where like the math can take over the fantasy in the game.
Yeah.
Trying to make a hard combat is actually really hard in 5th edition D&D.
Yeah.
You know, if you haven't tried it, and if any of your listeners who are running games haven't tried it, go check out MCDM's stuff, Matt Colville's stuff. The stuff he makes is genuinely terrifyingly hard. I have absolutely traumatized my players with it. So,
well, and something that would you look at that? We got Ryan in the chat.
But he knows how I roll.
But again, we'll wrap up this D&D. Well, no, we're not going to wrap up this D&D.
No, we're not going to wrap anything up having to do with D&D. You brought me on this show. You did this to yourself.
I knew what I was doing. But like, for those of you that are DMs, I do encourage, again, like, I'm not going to be telling you how to play your games, but like, I understand the urge to just want to create a good experience for your players. But something that I actually really found really awesome about this last session is there's a quote. There's a UFC fighter he says that he takes people underwater and they discover themselves. That's how he described his fighting style. And I've never related so much to it, to something, because like, I want my players to actually know what they can do with their characters, because I'm sure, Colby, you can relate to this, but you're thinking like, you have not just a spell, but 6 items and everything there to help you out in this situation. And it's literally just sitting on your character. Like, you have the materials to take care of these situations, but they're just in such a rhythm of like, okay, let's do the most badass thing rather than And towards the end of this session, again, I had killed 2 players at this point and they'd been revivified, but they were actually going through their character sheets and be like, oh, I have an item that can do this. I can do that. And in those situations, like, I don't care if it's metagaming. I'm glad that they're actually discovering what their character actually has the full capacity to do, because, I mean, Colby instituted this rule that the squirrel's God. You have to listen to the squirrel. The squirrel is a vengeful God.
The squirrel.
So again, side note, I 3D printed a bird that has my man bun and everything, and I just put that out. And when that bird is out, the players know he is not holding back.
Yep. I mean, continuing to turn this into a D&D podcast, I think, and we'll bring this back to the show with that keyword meta. I mean, meta info about these sorts of things is not bad. It doesn't necessarily take you out of the experience. And I found my experience watching Delicious in Dungeon was like increased by thinking in terms of like action economy and like the equipment that the characters would have. This story is absolutely something that could come about as part of somebody's Dungeons and Dragons campaign. And that could come about just because of the way the game is designed, or because the DM decided, I'm not going to give you very much money to start your campaign with. You can have good equipment, but no money. And I see you, Ryan. No, D&D, no Shrek.
This is just
I love Shrek, but no,
this is just a revolving door of different podcast subjects.
Anyway, as in D&D, where talking to your players and being honest about when this is an encounter where you need to pull out all the stops and get creative, as opposed to just hitting stuff, that communication is what it's all about. And Delicious in Dungeon, I mean, this would not be as fun and as interesting to me if I didn't already know all these things about all of the tropes. It is absolutely banking on those tropes. And I love it. I mean, I keep meaning to say this. I was going to say it earlier on. I don't watch anime. I really don't. Not much at all. I watched Trigun. I watched Cyberpunk Edge Runners. I watched this. I could probably think of a couple more. That's it. I don't watch anime. And anime is actually a like it's a hurdle for me to get over to get into something, and I got into this because it is playing very openly with tropes and with its own world. It's just like, hey, what if this? And it's kind of got this like nudging you in the ribs kind of quality throughout.
And I really do think that, again, like I have played at tables where the DM it's straight edge, like you, and I feel like there's a time and place for that. Like I feel like
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely a time and place, but I also think both of our own DM styles is more of a like, as long as our players are having fun, that's what really matters. But on the flip side of that, if our players are always just being badass and kicking ass, like it's not fun. Like the Avengers need to have Thanos. Like
Yeah. It gets boring real fast if you just say, and I beat them by doing this cool move. Nobody is into even superhero shit because of the cool moves.
yeah,
I mean, it's there and it's enjoyable, but that's not the main thing that people are in it for.
yeah, they're
You
there.
need that adversity.
They need the adversity. They need the broken. I mean, I feel like they always make an emphasis. Like, go back. Those of you that haven't watched the first Avengers, which I still think is one of the better Marvel movies. Go back and just watch the first hour. You can see how broken, like, none of those characters are people they want on the event. Ironically enough, Hawkeye's the only Avenger that they're like, we want him. We want the guy with the bow and arrow. He's on our team. Like, they wanted Abomination instead of Hulk. They wanted, like, I'm sure they would have much rather had War Machine than Tony Stark. And they
Hmm?
sure as hell did not want Thor. That we taking some alien from another planet over here, stealing our American jobs. God damn it! But that's like not. They're all rejects. Like I guess Captain America technically was they wanted him, but Captain America and Hawkeye, the two guys that are one with a
Uh-huh.
shield and one with a bow and arrow. Like,
Uh-huh.
and they make it work. Like it comes together and it's fun and it's poetry. It rhymes. Like it,
Yeah.
but
Well, and similarly, you get a kind of alchemy when you just kind of throw some characters in together who kind of don't belong. Um, and D&D has this idea that like you need this specific party composition, and you need like a magic caster, and you need a healer, and you need a rogue, and you need a fighter. And some of the most fun we've ever had was when we didn't have that,
yeah,
when you just kind of have to make do with like these two assholes and this person who actually cares, and that one's just here for a paycheck, you know.
I know you'll appreciate this, Colby. But in the campaign I'm running right now, at one point there were 3 druids, 1 fighter, bard, and a
Yup.
cleric.
Yup. Huh.
And only one of those druids was a Circle of the Moon clerics.
Yeah, yeah, and then the fun comes from making do and getting creative.
I will say this, Sammy, if you're watching this, I am sorry for last session, our cleric, where she was like, "Oh my god, guys, it's on me. People are dying. I can only cast Revivify twice more." Oh my god.
4 bards, 1 very annoyed paladin. Yep, that's a good time right there.
I called dibs on the paladin. That's all.
Well, that makes me think of that one time that we did the Oops All Goblins one shot.
When was
It
that?
was forever ago, and I think we even did like somebody brought, I think Shar brought drinks over and did like jungle juice or something, and basically I just handed each of you a goblin character, and it was not about big heroes, it was about the goblins running the raid.
Well, maybe that's why I don't remember.
Yeah, drinks were had.
I do want to get it. Like, we spent plenty of time on chapter 1, but there is a couple of areas that I do want to dive in real quick before we go. I do straight up just like, and we'll go ahead and talk about this more in the next Nana Vagar. Don't worry about Jungle Juice. We'll talk about that after, not in front of the kids. But I really do appreciate that they have like a legit system set up for revivification. Like, we're going to go more into detail in the next 6 episodes next week, but this, they already say, okay, when you're in the dungeon, there's some sort of magic that's here that you can get brought back to life. However, if you get digested, tough luck, you're dead. You're dead. But like in D&D, there's always like, that's the real struggle as a DM. Like, technically clerics can bring people back from the dead. Why are they not just going around like revivifying everybody? Like, even the idea in D&D, Honor Among Thieves, they're like, oh, we can't bring her mother back. I'm like, there's literally spells. There's literally more than one spell that can bring her back to life. Yes, it's rare. Yes, it's expensive. But like, I like that. I feel like 5e has done a poor job at like making, and again, maybe it is more difficult than, like, I haven't really sat down and thought about it. I appreciate what Critical Role has done, where it's more of a player like intermingling sort of situation where everybody has to contribute something to this resurrection ritual. But even then, like, I feel like if somebody dies like at a young age, that a mother could coax them enough to come back. I feel like there's enough out there to like bring people back to life rather than just being like,
yeah. Well, and what does it do to a world where you can bring anyone back?
yeah.
And most D&D campaigns, the stuff that they've got written for the worlds that you play in, they don't care. You know, that's only going to matter to your players. You're going to pretend that this is something very special that only your party can do. This show just assumes that everybody is, you know, this is a whole economy and people are going into this dungeon, they're dying all the time, and nobody's really that worried about dying. It hurts, it sucks, it's expensive, but like, you can come back from that. And you even see that in the first few seconds. Laios is just watching, like, he's hungry, and that's why he's not fighting the dragon, because he's hungry. And he watches his sister get like chomped and eaten by this dragon. They get teleported out, and he's like, well, that's going to be a problem. And it's a little bit like, it's a little weird to have that beat in the story. Like, my sister just got killed in the first episode of an anime. This is clearly going to lead to some kind of like revenge quest, right? No, we're just trying to, we need to find some bones so we can bring her back, which is so funny. And they have gone ahead and just like, okay, yeah, this is a world where revivification happens all the time, and people are going to react differently to things because of that.
Yeah, I mean, like, they, like you said earlier, they have all the attitude of like, oh yeah, that was the first time I died. Like, it's, you don't forget your first time, let me tell you. Like, they all act like they went till like they got shot, or like, I mean, like they broke an arm or something. It's like, oh yeah, like, the first time it sucks. The second time you just get used to it. By the time you're down to your 5th time, like, it's just a day in the life. Like,
oh man, did I die again? Oh no.
and I even think that they even said that like one of the worst things about dying is just like how expensive it, because you have to pay like the people that come and like bring you out. Like, that's
yeah. Getting the body is the hardest part. And there's been a ton of discourse about this, you know, in D&D in particular. And, you know, talking about, okay, so you've killed a character. What now? Now you do a quest to get their body back. This is one of those ways in which D&D does not reflect the real world in any way, shape, or form. And like, sometimes that can be to the detriment of like the drama in the game, especially if you don't want to plan out a whole, you know, as a DM, if you don't want to plan out a whole new adventure to try and get what they need to do the revivify. If you for some reason you want to kill a character, somebody wants to play a new character, or you need a reason to say this villain is bad and you should kill him, the fact that revivification exists is a problem.
Well, and I feel like with this story in particular, the way that they, again, I don't know if you had this thought, but this was something that I was thinking throughout the episode, was they there's literally hundreds of parties in this dungeon that are going through trying to claim
Mm-hmm.
this to get this so like the way that I'm like view it is, say that this is a world where you're trying to play D&D. If you are sick of your character, you just start like brand new party. Like you're still in the dungeon, it's still the same quest, but instead of being a himbo with a sword, you get to be a stoic samurai who has this cold
Yeah.
collective.
Or, you know, a bisexual tiefling, or any one of a million tropes.
Exactly. But anything else we want to cover in this first chapter as we cross over the hour and 5 mark?
My God. I mean, I do just want to give the show props for paying attention to like the characters' roles in their party.
Yes.
And that shift that takes place when they have a new approach and a new plan and a new party member, and they start having this you know, especially in the second episode, they have some tension about like, hey, I'm supposed to be the person who solves this kind of problem. You need to stay away from that. And so that's awesome to see, because that's something you absolutely see in just running D&D campaigns as well.
Yeah.
You get a new character and it's like, whose job is picking the lock now? We used to have a bard who could pick a lock or who could use this item, and we don't anymore. What now?
Yeah, it's funny enough, I was talking with a couple of my party members after our last session, and our barbarian fighter almost like he died. Like he had failed all his death saving throws and he was dead, but he got revivified, and he had told me he had told me that he was planning on coming back as a ranger. Like his next character was going to be a ranger. I'm like, okay, so who's the front line? There are 2 druids, there is bard, there is a cleric.
Yeah, and there's this big shuffle and there's a lot of tension, and sometimes even tension like in real life between the players. Like, if you hadn't brought in this stupid useless character, it's not useless, you just haven't found the answer to the equation yet.
Yeah, that's just some of the
And
I think it's just such a fun part of that
mm-hmm.
is there. Side note, I don't like the design of the basilisk. Like I really wasn't. I know that's the traditional basilisk look.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely prefer like 5e's, like just big chunky
Uh-huh.
boy, or even Harry. Like I love Harry Potter. It's just a giant snake. I don't like the chicken. Like I get it, that's a
Yeah.
classic, but
Yeah. I like chunky boy with 6 legs and petrification powers. That's a basilisk to me. So I don't know.
I don't know what they were doing with this whole chicken with a snake tail, but
I particularly love the green slime though. That's straight out of the Dungeon Master's Guide.
yes. I also really do like the carnivorous plants. They sort of remind me of, what's the Pokemon's name? Is it Veeping Bell? Like the one that James has in Pokemon. But I like that design. I really can't complain other than the basilisk overall of the monster designs in this.
Yeah.
We get to the chapter about ghosts. I do have my critiques on ghosts, but ghosts are just such a tricky thing in D&D in general.
Yeah.
But chapter 2, deepening bonds and facing new challenges. Episode 3, living armor. Laios recalls how he obtained his sword from a living armor monster 3 years ago. The party is surrounded by living armor monsters, and Marcel deduces that they're controlled by a hidden sorcerer. Laios defeats a large suit of armor on discovering that there is not a sorcerer, and discovers that they're actually little creatures. I'll just go with creatures. Little creatures controlling it. Senshi cooks the mollusk-like monster with mixed results. Episode 4. Senshi reveals his secret campsite with golems used for growing vegetables. Marcel is disgusted by Senshi's use of waste as fertilizer, but learns the golems protect the upper floors. The party trades vegetables with orcs who are struggling due to the red dragon's incursions. Marcel and the orc chief Zahn overcome their species' omnicity to share a meal. Zahn reveals the dragon was last seen on the 5th floor. Up to this point, I really think that episode 4 is probably one of my favorite episodes in general. It oddly goes deep, for an episode in this show. Also, everything that Zahn says about elves is true, but
Well, and I was gonna say episode 3, I think, is my favorite
really?
so far of the show, because to me, we were talking about how do you start a show. You've got that first episode that's 100% logistics. Who are the characters? Why are they doing stuff? Second episode, we do a little bit more of the same stuff, but we start to get into a rhythm. And third episode, they're in that rhythm. And what it feels like to me is that the writers were like, okay, so we've established that you can eat stuff in the dungeon. And then they opened up a monster manual and they flipped through and they were like, what is the last thing that should be edible? And how can we make it edible? And I love it.
Well, in living armor, like obviously gelatinous cubes, beholders, red dragons, those are all like very classical D&D monsters. But I feel like living armor, you could make an argument, maybe not for S tier D&D monsters, but I'd put it in the A tier, like very classic monster right there. And you see it reflected in other shows. There's one particular show that I love that's an anime, of course, Solo Leveling. And at the season finale of season 1, it is like animated armor that is like the big fight scene, and it's epic. And I just appreciate that they use animated armor in such a way, because I feel like they're so easy to make lame.
Yeah, it's a monster that comes up really, really often because it's easy to run. And I have actually very recently been running a lot of games for people who have never played any TTRPG at all. And, show them a door with 2 statues on either side. What are they going to think? Even if they've never played before, they're going to like, oh, those statues are going to come to life and they're going to fight us. And that is so deeply ingrained in people's ideas around fantasy that like you kind of have to. But then it also is just like a humanoid that swings sword.
Yes.
How do you make that any more interesting? And this show does a great job of like, no, it's not magic. It's not just big humanoid shaped thing that swings sword or bonk hard or is hard to. It's, if it's animated by magic, this thing should either be invincible, impossible to kill, or completely lame. Like, knock off the head, it can't see anymore, and you just go on your merry way. And they find, when I was watching this episode the first time, I was like, okay, they're doing the magical thing. I can tell because those pieces of armor are crawling back toward each other. And this is going to be really hard. They're going to go the direction that's like impossible to kill. And then they gave the animated armor a reason to do what it was doing. And I appreciate that so much. That's exactly the kind of thing that can really breathe life into a piece into a combat. Like, turn it into a puzzle rather than just a slog.
And again, like, we're probably just going to keep bringing this up throughout it. Like, yes, there's a time and place for a slog, but at the same time, like, I'm a firm believer that there's always, I don't want to say an easy solution, but especially like you see it in video games, you see it especially. I feel like Legend of Zelda, particularly, like I've loved Tears of a Kingdom. I love Breath of the Wild. There's always like every villain you fight, even Ganondorf, like there is an easy way to beat him. Like if you just try to go in there like sword ablaze, like yeah, it might suck, but eventually you could beat him. But there's always going to be their Achilles heel, where it's the trick is trying to figure out how do you actually find that. And it is like how it was in this campaign where they were fighting the armor and they're like, hey, like they can't see without their helmets, but we're getting swarmed here. Like what's going on? And they eventually are able to deduce it and defeat the challenge. And I think it's just a very unique way of showing that, rather than just being like, oh yeah, just have them beat 20 pairs of armor and let's keep rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and also just like, and then it's just silly and fun that they cook and eat it.
That's the real reason.
I mean, that used to be the sole ground of The Witcher, especially the Witcher video games. like solving a monster first before you fight it.
Yes.
And preparing for the fight, you know, that was what The Witcher brought into fantasy in a way that, you know, it wasn't really there before, or at least that I noticed. I'm probably completely wrong about that. But anyway, yeah, I just love that. I love the thought that you need to look deeper than just like this is clanking metal armor and is going to swing its sword and it's going to hurt me. You need to look deeper at things, and I feel like that is almost like, if there is a moral to each of these episodes, and it kind of feels like they made it so that there is.
Yeah.
Like episode 2 is like, hey, you should work as a team, and episode 3 is like, you should look deeper at things.
Yeah.
And I just really enjoy that. I think that came together really, really well. So like,
in episode 4's message, if you disrespect vegetables, you'll get a sword through the chest. Like, like
yes, respect your vegetables.
No, I mean, again, like I said earlier, like this show does such a great job at being just a goofy, like going on an adventure. We have fun characters, we have fun things to see, but at the same time, like there is these deeper like subjects that they're covering. Like, as Ryan alluded to, we covered Shrek a couple weeks ago, and I rewatched Shrek for the first time in years, and I was like, I love this movie. Like, for the longest time, I was like, oh, this is overhyped. No, like Shrek is honestly probably one of my favorite movies to come out of the 2000s era. Like, I'm not exaggerating when I say that. It's very fun. There's deep, meaningful messages in it, and like the animation is oddly amazing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you live in the world of art, and you find very quickly that things become memes for a reason. Nothing becomes a meme because it just sucks. You know, nobody talks about Nickelback because it's absolute garbage music. People talk about it because it is good enough music that people will actually listen to it, but not want to actually like say they listen to it.
Yeah, I've been firmly on the train that I enjoy Nickelback. I am unafraid to be out like this. I have been out of the closet when it comes to Nickelback for years now.
Yeah.
And no one
They just landed in this unfortunate place of like, this genre of music was on its way out, and they were like among the best at that time when it was on its way out.
I really feel that Daughtry could have been that too. Like, it's just it was almost like a fight. Like, is it going to be Daughtry that's going to be the butt of the joke, or is it going to be Nickelback? Daughtry,
or Creed,
or hey, there's enough divorced dads out there to keep Creed in business. That was our subject a little just under a month ago. We were going into that a little bit too much. On a dragon.
Short tangent on the tangent. I recently had a barbarian in one of my campaigns whose actual like character name was Creed Nickelback, and it actually worked really well.
I love that.
It was funny, it was fun, and it worked.
I hope that they multi-classed into a bard at some point. But going back into episode 4, just because I do like, I love. Like, eventually we're going to talk about the show Frieren, which I know you said that you're not much of an anime watcher, but Frieren is another show, not as like blatant as Delicious in Dungeon, but Frieren pretty much is a show of like, what is a party of adventurers doing after they complete their party? And it's just sort of exploring the different realms of like how these heroes are either immortalized and become legendary, or they just sort of fade off into obscurity. And it's oddly enough a beautiful story, and easily one of my favorite things to come out of 2024. But the reason I bring that up is, in these shows, the episodes are almost 2 episodes in 1 episode, and I feel like you especially see it in episode 4, where the first half they go into Senshi's little garden where he's creating these golems, well, not creating the golems, but like helping the golems survive. And they're all like, "What are you doing? Those kill people." Like you, but then he explains like, "Okay, no, but they fend off other monsters, and if I don't, those other monsters come, nobody will be able to make it." And it's one of those things that, again, like, I'm not going to sit here and say I do this as a DM, because I don't, because there's not enough time in the day to do it. But there's at least a good justification of why particular monsters are in particular areas, and why there's, I mean, like, I don't know. I just appreciate that side of it, but also just enjoy a good golem.
Yeah. And these are very good golems. They're scary, but also useful.
Yes.
Which is what a golem is supposed to be.
Uh-huh. Exactly. They're meant to be for gardening.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It's coming back again and again to the idea that this isn't just, this dungeon isn't just a playhouse. It's not just a way of winnowing out who is actually meant to get to the end or something like that, which most, if you run a lot of D&D, every dungeon's got this kind of explanation. How it came to be, why. Most of them are some kind of like gauntlet for somebody to find the sword of Umdurman at the end and slay the ancient demon lord or something like that. And it makes sense, if you're going to set up a ton of traps, trying to find the chosen one is one way to explain it. Sinking a city under the ground is the way they explain this one. But then, over years and years and years, DMs have talked about, think about this as a living place. This place has existed for centuries. How is it going to change over time? It makes it more interesting if you even give that the slightest little bit of thought. And this show, again, is just taking it as far as they possibly can. They're taking that thing that you're supposed to stop and think about for 10 minutes and they thought about it clearly for years.
Yes, they're making an episode about it.
Exactly.
Or half an episode, I should say.
Uh-huh.
But I also do think it's very interesting because they obviously are filling in these stereotypes in the show. Like, they're making it so that the humans are the dumb ones, relatively dumb ones. They're making it so the gnomes are halflings. They're the less trusting, sort of skittish. They're making, like, as great as Marcel is as a character, and probably one of my favorite elves. I know I said it. I feel gross for saying it. but she still does have a level of being stuck up. And again, like, I feel like being stuck up is a very elf trait, but they explain all these things in a very way, and I feel like they don't do a better job than showing it with the orcs. Like, the orcs are just they live in the dungeon. They are vicious and brutal, not because it's in their nature to be these vicious, brutal people. Like, no, they're in these horrible situations where they're trying to live off the dungeon. They have a scary appearance, so they're forced into the dungeon. And when you force people out of society and like they're forced to survive, they're going to stab you for some cabbage. And again, like, I personally did love just the argument that Marcel and Zahn was having while they were making that meal over there. Like, it just, again, Zahn said nothing wrong about elves. Everything he said was actually correct.
Yeah, I mean, it's the looming specter of bioessentialism in D&D. It was, I mean, the thing that everyone probably doesn't know but should about D&D is that the people who made it, particularly the guy who owned it and had a ton to do with making it a big IP, Gary Gygax, he wasn't an awesome guy. There was a lot of cocaine involved. It was the late 70s, early 80s, so that should go without saying. But, like, I mean, what a lot of this comes out of is this old way of thinking that, like, the elf has this essential trait, which is all elves are stuck up and all orcs are evil. And that is an issue. If that is the sort of idea that underlies some really honestly huge problems in the real world. And it shows up in D&D because this is a game that has its start at a time when people were, well, I started to say more out about their racism than they are now, but then I stopped because
What are you
we
talking
live
about?
in
We defeated
2024.
it. We defeated it.
Racism is gone, clearly.
So,
Just look at the news. There's no sign of racism anymore. Job done. No, I mean, it's still in there. And Wizards of the Coast, who own and publish D&D and have done so since like the late 90s, I think, this is something that they continue to struggle with. And it's something that they have gotten like bitten in the ass over and over and over again, because even just like a few years ago, they released Spelljammer that has a fantasy race, word race coming up immediately, but they've got a fantasy race that look very chimpanzee-like. And also when they went into the lore, they're okay, so you've got chimpanzee-looking people. That's one thing. Then they dug up the lore behind them, and they were actually created by wizards to have higher pain tolerance and to be an enslaved workforce. And oh my god, this is sounding horrible. And even in the 2014 release of D&D 5th edition, you had these ideas about goblins, about orcs, and there are all of these weird ideas that you can start playing with. You can play as a half orc. How does that happen? If one of your parents was innately evil and one of your parents was not, then we all kind of know how you happened.
Yeah.
And that's horrifying.
Yeah.
There's stuff in D&D that's horrifying if you think about it too much. And this show doesn't shy away from that either.
And I feel like that's a whole subject that we can spend hours trying to cover, because I don't know. There, in my opinion, there's like, I appreciate some directions that Wizards of the Coast is going and making things more what it is, but at the same time, and again, this is a common thing that gets brought up on this podcast, is I personally hate it when I see, and I'll use Wizards of the Coast as an example, but they're like, they made an announcement about orcs, and they're like, we are now officially making it that orcs are not bad, and that is our social justice for the week, guys. We did it. We made. Yes. I'm like, okay, like, yes, you need to change it and make it so that these things, like, give justifications for what has gone on, but just because you did that doesn't mean you actually made any sort of difference.
Yeah.
And like,
yeah,
to me, it's more gross that they're like, this is our social justice, is that we're making it. And I'm like, they're high-fiving themselves in the boardroom, like, congratulations, we did our woke thing of the day. Let's move on to the like.
And what you've ended up with is a blander game. I don't know how much you've looked at the new rule books, the 2024 rule books, but for the most part, everything is like, the stuff that sucked before is fine now. And everything is not, it's not going to piss anyone off, but it's blander. Because all they wanted was to remove the bad. They weren't interested in talking about if orcs do not come from some sort of like evil god. If they don't come from, we could turn this into a philosophy podcast and talk about the very concept of evil. I mean, this lives in these ideas, but they didn't replace it with anything, is what I was getting at. Is, they just took out the offending part and didn't replace it with anything.
So this is going to be a spoiler for all of you that know that I know I've told you about this a little bit, but I'm currently writing my own fantasy novel. And in this book, I have a particular race of creatures that's called bogmen. Well, that's the slur that's used against them, is bogmen, because their continent is, half of it's this massive, massive bog, and the other half of the continent is a desert. And everybody in the world hates them. One, because they're very disgusting looking, they're naturally very quick, they're naturally and they often have the stereotype of being just thieves. But in reality, the reason that people have this deep-seated hatred for them is because at one point in time, they were the top of the world. Like, have these ancient civilization, like ancient buildings that are ancient temples but just because of how they fought amongst each other, their empire and then eventually crumbled. Everybody just has this deep-seated hatred of them because at one point, and so everyone disparages them, and eventually they just start taking on like, oh, I guess we are the thieves of the world. Well, I guess we are. So they just start buying into these stereotypes rather than actually being like, oh, I'm genetically modified to be over here wanting to steal everything. But no, it's because the world
Mm-hmm.
tells them like they are just warmongering thieves that want to steal everything from people. And that's a subject that I really want to actually dive more into when I get more into that book. But it's something like I feel like, and again, like I'm not sitting here saying Wizard of the Coast. Well, I am, but there's ways to do that. Like you can make it like how they did with orcs. Orcs are over here, they're vicious and they're death, but it's not out of being, it's not for the love of the game. It's because of desperation. They have to be doing that. And I feel like there's a way to do it where it's still interesting, but also not being like, oh yeah, we all know why they're doing it over here, guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I love stuff like that. I love it when these sorts of situations come out of a culture rather than just like, well, these guys were made by the evil wizard, so they're all evil. That's it.
It's lazy.
It's very lazy, and unfortunately, D&D is a very long-lived product, and it's got all of this history behind it, and all of these old adventures that people have very strong feelings about and want to bring back in various ways. And so it's a little bit like D&D is. It's got like a vestigial tail and like all of these little vestigial organs all over it. I don't know. Often I wish they would do something like this show did and come up with a reason. Don't just take out the bad, come up with a reason. Make it a world that we can believe.
Yes.
Like, you and I played games set in the Sword Coast as a setting. The D&D movie, Honor Among Thieves, is set in the Sword Coast. And man, what do you remember most about the D&D movie? Is it the setting? Is it the cultures?
It's a big dragon. Just kidding.
Big fat dragon. That's what we all remember. Pudgy dragon, I love him, but we don't remember the like deep world building because everything has been repainted so many times that it's like, you're moving into a new apartment that has a really lazy landlord and just slaps a new coat of paint on every single time until like everything about the place is just paint texture. And that's it.
Well, and Ryan, if you're still in the chat, I feel like you can help agree with me on this. One thing that I love about this, so one franchise and fandom that I respect the hell out of, even though I know it's a completely evil world, there is no good, it's all horrible horrificness, is Warhammer 40K. Like there are no good guys. In fact, everybody is their own version of Hitler in this situation. Like it's
Yep.
but they do a great job of like painting why each person, like what is going on in these worlds. And I'm not saying justification by any means, but it's painting what's going on, how we got to this point. It's not just like, oh, the Space Marines, they the goodest you can get. Oh, these aliens over here, they bad. Like orcs, and again, like everybody has a reason. There's all these motivations, and they just do such an amazing job of building out this world. And it just shows to me that Wizards of the Coast, like if they wanted to, they could, because there is this fandom that is huge and they've done
Yeah.
it. But they're like,
There's a hunger for it to be done well.
yes, like for me, and I think we both can relate to this, but like for me, lore is the most interesting thing about shows, about books. One of my favorite shows of all time is Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. And in the show, my favorite episode of all time is like explaining how the villain became the villain. And it's sort of like the creation, I don't want to say creation of alchemy, but creation of what alchemy became in the show. Those of you that have not watched it, go watch it. It's amazing. There's the plug. But again, like or a show I know we both have watched, Avatar The Last Airbender. My favorite episode of Avatar The Last Airbender is the flashback episode where Aang sees how Roku and Sozin were friends, and like how Zuko was reading about Sozin, just because it's showing you exactly how the Fire Nation grew to be the empire that it is and decided to take over. And more importantly, how the power of friendship is the solution to do. But in all seriousness, that episode is one of my favorite episodes because of that.
If you're into fantasy, this is what the selling point of fantasy has kind of always been for, throughout the entire 20th century. Fantasy, going back to great granddaddy Tolkien. I mean, all of this stuff is aping Tolkien. That's why we've got orcs. That's why we call them orcs. That's why we call them elves. And all of this, it's aping Tolkien. And I feel like a lot of this stuff comes out of just wanting to recapture and make a little bit more Tolkien, because he was just such a nerd that he went and in his own head just like simulated thousands of years of real politics and the change of language over time. And he was doing this because he could. But if Wizards of the Coast wants to do a little bit more, they need some of that. You can't crank this stuff out like it's like it's a pepper mill. It doesn't just keep. You need time and you need passion to create this kind of stuff. And that kind of lore comes out of, as you know very well, just hours and hours where you could have been, washing the dishes or cooking a healthy meal. And instead you're just sitting there trying to figure out why the hell orcs are purple in your world,
The second star in the sky causes the reflections. No, exactly. And
yeah,
before I dive more into what you're saying, I do feel like there's a controversy in the chat that I have to address. Blue Spirit in Avatar: The Last Airbender is my favorite episode in season 1. Notice that episode that I mentioned earlier is not in season 1. So Blue Spirit is in the top 3 favorite episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender. So I just have to clear my name real quick on that part. But no, and I feel bad because I feel like this is something that I really should save when we cover Legend of Vox Machina, but I feel like it just ties too close to the subject at hand. And I want your thoughts on this, but I really think that Critical Role is both the antidote and the poison that is killing Wizards of the Coast. And what I mean by that is Critical Role is what saved D&D and popularized it, but it's also what really commercialized it and made it so that the boardrooms actually were filled with like, all right, we need to make these business decisions, rather than they took all the people out that were like, I'm sure there's people that are passionate about D&D, but it's filled with people like, no, we need to be making our quarterly bonus this year.
Yeah, it's about the people who are making the decisions, importantly. Wizards of the Coast is full of people who love what they do and love these IPs.
Yes.
I don't want to rag on them. It's the people who are deciding what ships that I want to rag on.
Exactly. It's just that idea that, like, and again, I'm not saying that there weren't problems before, but I really feel like Critical Role just brought it up, and then the corporate side are like, oh, people love this, let's do something cool, we need to keep making money. And we've seen just problem after problem after problem, whether it's like how they tried to restrict content creators with D&D, whether they tried to like just everything they were doing is more about chasing that dollar rather than actually for the love of the game. Like, and again, Ryan, if you're there, you Warhammer 40Kers, I want that for my community. I want to be part of your community, but there's too much homework for me to get into that. But
yeah, it's the poorly thought out chasing of infinite growth.
Yes,
that you just can't do in any context, much less in this game.
Yeah,
there's just no way to turn this into a billion-dollar industry. If it was a billion-dollar industry, nobody would like it anymore.
yeah. Like, just settle for be a multi-$100 million
yeah, right?
industry. Come on, guys.
Uh-huh.
Before we get pulled down too much of these rabbit holes, let's go ahead and cover chapter 3, go over this, and then we can just spitball any of our D&D ideas that we're wanting to be going. But chapter 3, Trials, Revelation, and Moving Forward. Episode 5, another adventuring party led by Kabua is found dead after encountering venomous treasure bugs. Laios' hidden monster goes berserk but may have tried to protect him. Senshi cooks the edible treasure bugs into snacks while inedible ones turned out to be real treasure. Ghosts attack the party, reminding them of Fallon's kindness. Senshi creates an exorcist sherbet from the frozen holy water, driving the ghosts away. Episode 6. The party discovers a dining hall with living picture monsters. Laios explores the painting depicting the life of Prince Daigle, encountering an elf who mistakes him for an assassin. The party realizes the food in the painting is not real and sets up camp. Chilchuck is lured by a treasure bug into a mimic's trap but escapes. Senshi cooks the mimic, which is revealed to be a giant crab, and Chilchuck reluctantly eats it. Chilchuck reveals his age, marking Laios the youngest party member. I love everything about this exorcist sherbet. It is the most ridiculous thing that ever.
Yes. Yeah, this was another great example of, I feel like they went through the monster manual and they were like, what's the most inedible looking thing?
A ghost. I actually do want to just touch on ghosts in D&D real quick, because I'm just not a fan of ghosts. That I don't think they're really fun. Like, I don't know if you played Baldur's Gate 3 or not, but there's a particular mission once you get to the city where you have to fight the ghost, and it's easily one of, like, I almost just want to skip it every time, because it's just not fun, because you essentially have to, like, have certain spells ready, but if you don't have those spells ready, you're just killing your own party members until and
yeah,
it just comes down to, like, yes, I know we were just talking about earlier about having puzzles on how to solve these monster issues, but I also feel like with ghosts in particular, you have to have a certain class to be able to, a certain class or a certain amount of money to fight ghosts. Otherwise, you're literally just killing your own party until.
Yeah, and actually, like, that's a great example of one of, like, I run a ton of D&D 5e to this day. I'm running 3 full campaigns of D&D 5e. So, like, when I hate on it, it's out of experience. One of my biggest complaints about D&D 5e that other games do better, or other systems do better, is that, like ghosts, many problems are insoluble until you have the right thing, and then they're trivial.
Yes.
And there's nothing in between.
Yes.
He doesn't have a very good answer for, like, well, how do we make this monster into a challenge, into a puzzle? Their answer for it is, well, you have to have the right spell. And if you have the right spell, then you get to feel really good about beating that challenge really, really quickly and in a really, like, anticlimactic way. It is one of my least favorite things. And you're absolutely right. If you look at the ghost stat block in 5e, which is exactly what is in Baldur's Gate 3 as well, because it's, 95% 5e based.
Yes.
And they're dealing with those same limitations, which is that the ghost has this one thing it can do. And that one thing is very powerful. But if you can get past that, then it's trivial. Absolutely trivial. And yeah, I really dislike, you're right, I dislike ghosts, because in fiction, if you look at how ghosts are handled in The Witcher, or in the Witcher games, they are, they're a role play challenge. You have to talk to them. You need to figure out why they are the way they are before you can do anything about them.
Yes.
And in 5e, a ghost possesses your barbarian, kills half of your party, until somebody remembers to cast protection from good and evil, and then you're done.
Yes. And I think that's the big, I shouldn't say that. I am guilty of this. I know I am being such a hypocrite when I say this, but I also feel very comfortable where I'm at in my D&D life experience that I can say this now, but I feel like 5e does a very poor job at setting it up as an actual role-playing game. Like, the
Yes.
game is set up for socially awkward people that don't want to talk to each other and just want to go out and fight monsters. While some of the best moments in D&D have been just conversations. They have been like, and again, like, not to toot my own horn or anything, but one of my favorite moments in D&D was when we were playing Curse of Strahd, and when you guys realized that almost half of your party were all siblings from an evil
Yes.
bard. Like, it was just such a fun experience to see, even though it was virtually seeing your guys' faces, but just seeing like the, oh my god, that's my
Yeah.
brother, that's like, and it's just those sort of like narrative situations that have been popping up, and I feel like just more and more it's going away. We're not like, people are like, oh, let's go fight the red dragon and move on to the next one. And again, I'm guilty of that. I wanted to play a creature that just goes and hit things and doesn't, it's not good at talking to people. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely a huge thing that I still like, even in my paid games where like I'm literally getting paid to run this game. I actually have a certain amount of like, I don't feel like I should ask much of my players to, they're already paying me to run this game. But in a lot of my games, I do push people to do things that will enhance their experience, because I know that 5e is not going to do that for me. It absolutely will not. 5e is good at one thing and one thing only, and that is at being a compromise for all of the people who had something to gain from D&D.
yes,
It's a good compromise for the people who played in the 80s. It's a good compromise for the people who play now. And you can duct tape it into pretty much anything you want to. I personally would argue I'd rather play the game that you don't need duct tape to play what you want. Pathfinder, my current favorite, Mothership.
ooh, I'll have to look into that one.
4 stats, 3 saves, hit points, wound count, stress, and that's your entire character. That's it. Very, very simple, very few rolls, which I prefer. I find myself more and more preferring. I talked earlier about how I've been running horror games, and those are my favorites right now. Mothership is one, and that's meant to give you your like Alien, your Event Horizon kind of stories.
Yeah.
Obviously, Alien RPG is right here. Love that one. And Delta Green is the one that I'm streaming. Shameless plug.
Oh, don't worry.
Go watch my Delta Green campaign on YouTube.
There's going to be plenty of time for plugs later. Don't you worry.
Bryce, that sounds like you're propositioning me.
Oh, I love plugging, if you know what I mean. I'm all about them plugs.
Give me a good plug-in. But, I mean, the games that I find myself gravitating toward right now, they happen to be horror-focused, but I love them for their ability to get out of the way, be very, very simple, and just let what your character wants to do happen. And even as I run D&D 5th edition, I call for fewer rolls every single session. Unless I'm running combat, which I feel like I have to because it is 5th edition. Unless I'm running combat, I would rather not roll dice at all. If your character is a ranger, I don't want you to roll and fail at the thing you're supposed to be good at.
Yes.
I don't want you to fail a roll to find tracks. If you're a wizard, I don't want you to fail a roll to read arcane glyphs. So, like, we have gone deep into this tangent, but I mean, these archetypes are supposed to be able to do things. They're supposed to have specialties, and they're supposed to feel cool as they do those things. And if you run the game exactly as it's written out of a book or something like that, you're going to end up running a game where nobody's very good at anything, and the barbarian is as likely to read the arcane glyphs as the wizard is.
So something that I picked up from what you did during your sessions when I was one of your players is because I remember at first, if we actually were like trying to convince you, it first became like, oh, you get advantage on it. But I think it eventually you turned it into like, oh no, if you give me a good enough argument, like you convinced me, like you don't have to like roll to see if the guy is in the mood or anything like that. And I really try to because I agree if someone's like, I'm gonna lie to him, like, or like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna like, no, if you can spell out what you're doing, I want to reward my players for doing that. That's when, like, if they're over here like, oh, I want to go look for the key, I'm like, okay, so what does that look like? Are you like, again, I'm not going to
Yes.
sit here and say like, if they don't say that they're looking right underneath the mat over there, but if I say, hey, in here you see a desk, you see a spot, you see an area where you can see that there's been some movement, like people will be like, oh, I'm going to look for the, like, look where. That's where I think those sort of things come into play. I try to make it so it is that role playing aspect. And also just to, like, I will say this about 5e. One thing I do love about 5e is they make fights seem like anime fights. Like,
They really do. They really, really do. Yeah.
and you feel so amazing, and like the when you fail, it is like an epic fail, like in an anime fight. But when you succeed, by God, you feel like Goku over there doing a Kamehameha. Like
Yes.
there is nothing more satisfying than getting a natural 20 and then plugging a third level divine smite on a max.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But that's not personal experience at all. Not at all.
Says the guy who played a blind paladin.
Paladin's the best class.
Yeah, if you want to deal damage, hell yeah. That's my favorite. So
Austin will argue, like, again, I love just having the arguments with people because I love hearing their side, but Austin will still to this day say that Warlock is the best class, which there is some truth to that.
yes.
But if
For roleplay, in terms of roleplay potential and giving your DM tools to poke your character, Warlock is the best.
also,
Genuinely.
if you want to like do the most with as little as possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also understand, yes, everyone in the chat, Druid is technically mathematically the best class, blah, blah, like I said it, well, who cares? But the most fun class, if you want to be a monster god killer, is, well, god follower demon killer. But yeah, we can have a whole argument.
I mean, they're all of the classes are meant to be these important fantasy archetypes, and they're meant to give you that experience of being that character in a way that you know you can't just by watching a show. And I will say that for the most part, 5th edition does a great job of capturing the fantasy in those archetypes. Yeah, absolutely. If you play a monk, it gives you stuff that makes you feel quick and hard to hit and like you can pummel someone to death. To a certain extent, I think that that sort of class-based system, D&D is usually people's first tabletop role-playing game, and then they branch out, which I personally think that's backwards because D&D is enormously complicated.
Yes.
Your first RPG should be simple, not enormously complicated. But it does a great job of kind of forcing you into a road where you're going to get that experience. And that's why I think that's why it keeps continuing to be like the dominant thing in this market space, even while Pathfinder exists and is numerically better in every way, and other systems are simpler. And I could teach you Mothership in the time it would take me to finish another tangent.
Well, speaking of tangents, I feel like it's only proper that we bring up what Nana Vagar said. This podcast is built on tangents. Come for the dragon, stay for the tangent and the plugin.
Sweet, sweet plugin.
No words have been more truer, Nana Vagar. But no, I definitely agree. And I feel so bad because Austin's girlfriend, this is her first campaign that she's ever really been a part of. And she chose Druid as her very first D&D class that she's ever playing.
Boy. Say no more.
So it's one of those things where I do feel like I try to make it as straightforward for her as possible. I try to give her all the printout, but I also understand, like, I'm still confused at Druid as a class, and I've been playing this game for years, and I can't imagine what it's like trying to play it for the first time in a real campaign. But at the same time, like, I totally get where you're wanting to have this more nature-based class. And let's be real, Rangers suck.
Yeah. Well, they did suck. They're much better now.
They've got 2 subclasses that are all right. I'd still say that they're like, yes, they are better, but I'd still say that they're probably one of the, like, who's playing
Yeah.
Ranger and Baldur's Gate 3? Let's be real. Who's doing that?
Yeah. Ranger, I would say, is one of the classes that Ivy does the worst job of capturing the fantasy that you're looking for.
Yes.
Because they're not sure what it's supposed to be. And they've got this problem of all of this baggage. And, one person comes to the game and wants to play a ranger because they like Aragorn. Another person comes because they want to have an animal companion. Too bad that version sucks so bad. Again, they fixed that. 2024 rulebook. They did a pretty decent job of fixing that. but like, it's an archetype that doesn't know what it is.
Yes.
Is it Aragorn? Is it Drizzt? Is it Legolas? What is it supposed to be? If you're playing a monk, you know exactly the fantasy you're going for.
Yes.
That's exactly the fantasy you're going for.
Yes.
If you play a warlock, you are a divine. You're a devil's sugar baby.
You edgy boy. You edgy
exactly.
boy.
If you play a wizard, you know exactly what you're looking for. And I don't know. I think there actually is probably something deeper to be said, which again we can probably save for Legend of Vox Machina, because they really go hard at the archetypes in Legend of Vox Machina. But anyway, I think there's something to this idea that, like, we have these archetypes that we're so in love with, and sometimes they work and sometimes they kind of don't.
But at the same time, I am all about going outside of this archetype. Like, to this day, one of my favorite characters, and this might shock you a little bit, but one of my favorite characters that we've experienced in a campaign has been Austin's Warlock Taz, because it literally is just like a guy who got scammed into being a warlock.
Yes.
And he has no idea what he's doing.
Yes.
He's just
genuinely he does not understand. He is just too
it's not even that he's stupid. It's just like he literally just signed the wrong paperwork, and he's like,
exactly.
Oh dear.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the power of archetypes in storytelling, is like, you've got a touchstone that you can start people on, and then you can go deeper and you can go into unexpected ways, which, that's where a lot of these things came from originally.
Yeah. And, like, tying this all back.
Hey, weren't we talking about some kind of anime?
This is a D&D podcast now. We don't talk about TV shows here. But going back to this whole archetype of, because very much in the episode 6, we're dealing with Chilchuck, like, it, and I almost feel like it is a stereotype that rogues would hate mimics, because they're the ones that are having to, like, lockpick and all that good stuff. And it's just, we don't necessarily get the clarification that he's over the fear, because he eventually does eat the mimic. But I feel like it's doing a good way of, one, addressing a stereotype, and two, finding a way to move past it, because as we're finding out in these characters, all these characters are slowly, like, dissolving the archetype that they're in. Because, like, in these first 6 episodes, I do agree that, why am I blanking? I need my notes in front of me. That the elf girl, Marcille, yes. I felt like, yes, she's a wizard. But as we go later on, I'm like, oh, I think she's more of a druid. Like, I don't know if, like, I'd say that she's...
Yeah.
But I think it has more to do with, well, one, yes, there's, like, a nature aspect to it, but it's her personality that she has. She doesn't have like you understand like the reason that she has a stuck up attitude in the beginning is not because that she is actually stuck up, but just because she's got almost imposter syndrome. She's trying to be Farron, the sister, like,
Huh?
and
Yeah.
so she has this attitude. And then again, like we said, like, yes, we think that our big himbo is just this big meathead, but actually he is intelligent. And we do find out, spoiler alert for next week, that he's trying to just be strong because he's been weak all of his life. Like, and I'm excited to actually dive into that because I have personal experience in this area over here.
Yes.
But it's fun to just like they take in some cases they're taking these archetypes and they're either just leaning so hard into it that they're almost going past it, or they're taking it and just dissolving it in general and being like, no, it's not an archetype, it's just a baseline.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's part of the reason that this show is just so great. And two, I think it's so great because it's so relatable, because at one we have played a character. If you played D&D or played any role-playing game or even just an open world video game in general, you've played one of these characters or all of these characters.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you're absolutely right about them taking these archetypes head on. They acknowledge and they feed you exactly what you expect at the beginning of the show.
Yes.
And then they use that as a stepping stone to build onto and to show, they start playing all of these characters to type, almost to an annoying extent. And then they build up some things that are against type. And, if you play D&D, you probably have that back and forth, like, well, the barbarian, like, jumping off a cliff, screaming, on fire with the great axe in his hands to deal the last blow to the dragon. That's awesome. But also, if all you do is chase the stereotypical, like, archetypical images, then you're gonna be bored anytime that is not happening. And this show does a fantastic job of giving each of these characters something that is against type as well. And they're pretty economical with it as well. They don't spend a ton of time talking about any of their, trauma or anything like that. We'll talk plenty about Critical Role, but again, they kind of did the same thing with their first and second campaigns. Their first campaign was go hard at the archetype, and their shtick was like, yes, this is very stereotypical fantasy, extremely stereotypical fantasy. It's just done better than you've ever seen before. And then the second campaign is every single one of them is playing against type. And I'm really excited for their Mighty Nine show to come out as well. I demand to be brought back for that if and when it actually does show up and is any good.
I'm excited. I feel like we're going to have some disagreements, but I also feel like there's a lot that we're going to be able to agree on. Nope, I'm not saying anything because I know that it will just become a Mighty Vox Machina episode. But before we get sucked down into that whirlpool, we're going to swim out to safety here. But that is the first 6 episodes. I really appreciate everybody staying, but we're going to treat you, since there's not a dragon to do a grade on, we are going to go over the different foods that were served in this first 6 episodes and determine which one is our favorite. Like, which one looks the best, what one would calls to us the most. Colby, I don't know if there's a particular way that you want to do this. What called out to you when watching it? Because I think they all looked pretty great, but there were certainly some that looked a lot better than the others.
Yeah, I will throw out there that I am extremely biased in one direction. I have a shellfish allergy. And so every single time they're doing, the giant scorpion looks great. But to me, my body has learned that equals 12 hours of vomiting. So, like, that's the first place I go.
Fair.
But, well, and the hard part for me, maybe roast basilisk, honestly.
Yes.
It's that omelet looks so good.
Omelet looked amazing. I probably would put the omelet in the top 3 for me. I do agree with you that the huge scorpion with the hot pot does just look, it looks so traditionally Japanese. Like it just looks
Yes.
so good. And I'm surprised that this did not get brought up once throughout this podcast, but in cartoons, there's a stereotype of just the food looking so incredibly good.
Yes.
This show like you have to watch this show on a full stomach, otherwise you will go and raid your kitchen and just
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, well, just the fact that they are both referencing D&D and fantasy lore and also Chef's Table, which I'm also a big fan of.
oh, it's like I literally was watching this yesterday at like 11 o'clock at night, and I was like, I need to go. I'm gonna grill up a chicken sandwich. I'm gonna make some tacos. I'm gonna grab some ice cream. Like, I'm just over here.
I need good ramen right now.
Yes, not this microwavable shit. um, But for me, I just have to say that it is a three-way tie for my favorite. I know that I said that the omelet looked really good, but the man-eating plant tart looked amazing in my opinion.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
The
Yes.
the delicious treasure like snacks looked all
Yes.
incredible. That just gave me such Halloween vibes with like the chocolate
Huh?
candy and I guess this sort of ties into it, but the sherbet. Like it's
Uh-huh.
so stupid how it was made, but it looks so good.
It really does.
I feel
Uh-huh.
like this is something that we can actually both maybe I'm wrong, but I grew up on a lot of sherbet. Like I got
Uh-huh.
more sherbet than I did actual regular ice cream growing up. And so sherbet has a special place in my heart.
Yeah, same here.
And
Absolutely.
so seeing that I was like, oh, this looks amazing.
Yes.
I just need to find now the Instagram page that actually makes all these meals in real life.
Uh-huh.
Like
Uh-huh. There'll be a cookbook in 2 years. I guarantee it.
I'd be surprised if there's not one right now out there. Colby, do you want to plug some things real quick for us? I know you mentioned
Yeah, I absolutely am a professional dungeon master. I run on a website called startplaying.games, and I wish I could plug any of my games, but at the moment they're all full, which is a nice problem for me to have. My schedule's pretty full. But if you're interested, swing by, send me a message through there, and I can invite you to my Discord server where I tell you about all the new stuff that I start. And then I am streaming a Delta Green campaign. Delta Green is a tabletop role-playing game. If you know of or have seen Call of Cthulhu played, it's very similar, but a little bit more. It's a modern take on it. So modern, I say. It's set in 1992 at the moment. But anyway, think X-Files. Ages and ages back in the depths of when I was in second grade. But yeah, we are just getting started with a campaign. We've got lots of technical glitches in our first few episodes. Episode 2 barely exists at all, but more is coming, and the players are having a fantastic time, and I think it's going to be a fantastic campaign. It's going to go in some dark places. So
Colby knows, all of you guys know that I love dark fantasy. Dark fantasy is one of my sick, twisted enjoyments. You recommended the First Law trilogy to me, and I love the First Law trilogy. So good. Did you recommend the Prince of Thorns? I can't remember if you told me.
I don't think so. I don't know that one.
If you want, that one is, so not to spoil anything, but it's like a post-apocalyptic fantasy-esque, and like the main character is like an edgy emo boy who's like trying to become emperor of the land, and like, oh, it's just so good. Like it's so good. But now the podcast has turned into plugging dark fantasy novels.
Yeah. So if you want grimdark, if you want that darkness and you don't mind if you have no fucking clue what's happening at any point, go check out Gideon the Ninth as well.
Gideon the Ninth.
I really enjoyed that. Still no fucking clue what happened in that entire novel. No idea.
It was just dark.
Mm-mm. It was real dark. There's a bit of a Warhammer vibe to it, a little bit more like science fantasy, but like I'll plug that one. That one was awesome.
Like so going back again, like this will eventually end, guys, I swear. But one series that I love, and it's one of the first times where I'm like, no, the manga is amazing. I'm not really a manga reader, but Berserk is, I love, love Berserk. And it's just so dark. And I love all the historical ties, but all of like the dark fantasy, because it's like roughly based on the 100-Year War, and you're just seeing like all of the ties there. You see all the character development, and it's dark, it's evil. I love it. But
Yeah, and if you love the like, I think they're mostly AI driven posts on TikTok or Reels or something that has that one like noise in the background, and then it's just like dark fantasy artwork. If you want more of that, Berserk is one of the actual like main influences of that whole art style, along with a couple of not very well known like animated movies from the 80s. And there's some good shit out there. It's really good. You do have to deal with some really sexist shit, but
in my dark fantasy, I don't think so. I never.
It's from the 80s.
Colby, we all know
that go without saying.
The least sexist time in American history.
The time period that gave us Ronald Reagan. How could that be sexist?
That is an American icon in this household. We will not disparage our Lord and Savior, our God-fearing man, Ronald Reagan. Alrighty. Well, thank you everyone for joining. We will be back for more tangents next week, discussing episodes 7 through 12 of Delicious in Dungeon. Please go give Colby's channel a follow. Also, honestly, I can't say this enough, Colby. Like, and I know I've told you this in person, but I'm going to try to embarrass you in saying this. You seriously are the best DM that I have ever played under. Every game that it was one of those highlights where I just sat there and it just was such a magical experience to play. And I appreciate you dealing with my fucked up mentality of coming in. And
well, and Bryce was there when I was really, really new at it too. So like he saw the worst of what I could give.
And just me, what was I giving back though? What was I giving back?
It did actually just occur to me that I said, go watch my Delta Green campaign, and I didn't say where.
Yes. Tell everyone where to watch Delta Green.
Yes, I am on YouTube as Rock Paper Science. So if you search Rock Paper Science, I made up the name back when it was going to be a geology-based YouTube channel. So you can go watch my 2 geology videos as well. But anyway, go check out Rock Paper Science. If you go on Start Playing, there's not that many Colbys on there. And I'm the only one that looks anything like me. And you can find it all on my link tree, which is just, the typical link tree / Colby Ford. So,
and that'll be in the description below. So we'll get that awesome there. But again, thank you for coming on. I'm excited to talk next week.
Me too.
Everyone like, share, subscribe, both areas. And we will be back next week in Delicious in Dungeon. Dungeon and Delicious. This show's ending.
That's all for this week's Dragon Lore. Takes cold and hot, spread shore to shore. Enjoyed yourself? Please join the squad. Follow on social media at BigLizPod. And one quick reminder before you go, to rate, review, and share the show. Thank you for listening. It means a lot. See you next week. Same time, same spot.